The Empire of Empty Pockets. How a nation that mistook extractive plunder for an economy lost capitalism, common sense, and its collective mind. Author Othniel Max Daves. Date, November 10, 2025. A nation of illusions does not collapse when the powerful lie. It collapses when the people finally stop pretending to believe them. Then and only then can the real nation breathe and live again. Dedication. For those who were never invited to the feast, but rather became the feast. This essay is dedicated to the men and women who were told they were the backbone of the nation, only to discover they had been repurposed as the consumable parts. Those whose labor was praised in speeches but priced into oblivion in budgets, whose resilience was celebrated only because their exhaustion was profitable, and whose loyalty was mistaken for infinite tolerance. It is for the citizen who filled out every form, checked every box, paid every fee, followed every rule, and was still denied at the counter of their own country. It is for the small business owner who watched advisors on television extol the virtues of entrepreneurial innovation, while the bank across the street treated their loan application as a suspicious artifact requiring forensic scrutiny. It is for the landowner who discovered that the only people allowed to leverage land in America are those with no intention of stewarding it. It is for the working family who did everything right except to be born into a system that punishes sincerity and rewards scale. And it is for the local founder whose ideas could have rebuilt a region if only the guardians of capital weren't so committed to hoarding it in glass towers far from the people who would use it wisely. It is also dedicated in equal measure to those who engineered this catastrophe, not out of malice, but out of habit, hubris, and a level of short-sighted self-regard that would make a Roman emperor blush. To the bureaucrats who confused delay with diligence, whose devotion to process eclipsed their responsibility to people. To the academics who wrote eloquently about communities they never visited and systems they never participated in. To the elites who mistook asset bubbles for prosperity and public patience for political consent. To the think tank strategists who believe equations can replace neighbors, and the consultants who think slide decks can substitute for wisdom. This essay is, in a way, for them too, because every failing empire needs its chroniclers, and every chronicler needs a cast of willing participants who remain steadfastly oblivious to the roles they play in the collapse. Above all, however, this work is dedicated to the reader, the one who still senses something is wrong, the one who refuses to swallow the narratives being spoon-fed from above, the one who recognizes that satire is no longer exaggeration, but simply the most efficient way to describe the age. May these pages confirm what you've suspected all along, that the absurdity is real, that the system is broken, that the decline is not accidental, and that the truth, however darkly delivered, still has the power to wake the sleeping giant of a people who were never meant to be tenants in their own nation. This is for you. You who endured. You who saw. You who remember that a republic is not a machine, it is a covenant. And covenants, once broken, cry out for restoration. Author's note. For those still wondering whether the emperor's clothes are dry clean only. Let us begin with a confession. I did not intend to write this as satire. The nation simply made satire the only available language. When reality becomes indistinguishable from parody, the writer's role shifts from storyteller to stenographer, faithfully taking dictation from a civilization that insists on broadcasting its own decline in high definition. This work is not an exaggeration. It is an autopsy report with punchlines. It is a map of absurdities so vast they require their own postal codes. It is the portrait of a republic that mastered the art of pretending everything is fine long after the roof collapsed and the foundation dissolved into a slurry of debt, denial, and dubious policy briefs. The reader should understand at the outset that we are examining a national economy that insists on calling itself capitalism, while denying its citizens access to capital. This is the equivalent of hosting a dinner party without food, declaring it a culinary triumph, and then scolding the guests for not applauding the empty plates with greater enthusiasm. The American citizen has been repeatedly invited to this banquet of borrowed prosperity, handed a bill for courses they never received, and then lectured for not tipping generously enough. Let me say this plainly. A system that extracts everything and creates nothing is not an economy. It is a crime scene with a marketing department. And yet, here we are, living inside a national farce so thoroughly normalized that pointing out the absurdity feels like a faux pas. Somewhere along the way, the Republic convinced itself that the solution to falling wages was more inspirational messaging, that the cure for institutional decay was additional layers of bureaucracy, and that the appropriate response to economic cannibalism was to admire the sophistication of the cutlery. Thus, this work serves one purpose: to illuminate the spectacular foolishness of an age in which elites congratulated themselves for managing the decline they engineered, bureaucrats mistake stagnation for order, and academics produce finely footnoted defenses of collapse. Meanwhile, Main Street is left performing a kind of patriotic triage, trying to staunch the bleeding of a nation whose leaders have the attention span of caffeinated pigeons and the foresight of a man attempting to extinguish a house fire with scented candles. But this is not merely a critique. It is a eulogy for the illusions that once sustained us. It is a requiem for the myths we were instructed to believe were sacred. It is a spotlight on the puppeteers whose strings snapped years ago while the marionettes continued dancing out of habit. If the tone is sharp, it is because dull knives do not cut through delusion. If the humor is dark, it is because the lights in our institutions have long since burned out. If the satire is relentless, it is because the subject matter demands nothing less. We stand at the threshold of consequence, an inflection point created not by enemies abroad, but by incompetence at home, curated by elites whose greatest skill is failing upward, and whose only consistent contribution to national life is their unwavering ability to misunderstand everything. This author's note, then, is not an apology for the brutality of the pages that follow. It is an invitation to clarity. It is a warning that laughter and horror are sometimes the same sensation. And it is a reminder that recognizing the absurdity of the moment is not cynicism. It is the first step in reclaiming sanity from a system determined to extract even that. Welcome to the essay written for a nation that insists it is thriving while quietly drowning. Welcome to the testimony of a people too exhausted to protest and too intelligent to continue believing. Welcome to the story we all know but rarely admit. As it is for people, so too for the nation. And a nation built on illusions eventually chokes on them. Now let the autopsy begin. Preface: a guided tour through the extraction age, in which the reader is handed a map to the graveyard of the illusion, a warning, and a strong suggestion to buckle up. Every age believes itself unique. Most ages are wrong. But this era of economic cosplay, bureaucratic pageantry, elite delusion, and institutional molting, has achieved a level of absurdity so remarkable that it deserves its own guided tour. What follows in these chapters is not merely analysis. It is a diagnostic walkthrough of the American condition, presented one system failure at a time. Think of it as the nation's overdue annual report, except honest. This preface exists to orient the reader, offer a lamp for the descent, and prepare you for the fact that each chapter illuminates a different room in the same collapsing building. You may laugh, you may wince. You may wonder how the Republic has managed to survive this long on duct tape, denial, and the spiritual equivalent of expired caffeine pills. But by the end, you will recognize that each chapter is part of a single anatomy, the body of a nation devouring itself in real time. Below is your map with non-title one-sentence explainers in case reading each chapter summary is too painful, or your favorite social media influencer has announced a sudden emergency love stream on their latest outrage. Chapter 1. The Grand National Illusion, Capitalism Without Capital. This chapter introduces the central lie of our era, the belief that we still live in a capitalist system, despite the fact that capital has been sequestered in gated compounds guarded by financial warlords wearing Patagonia vests. Here you will meet the absurdity of a nation insisting it is free, while the majority cannot qualify for a $7,500 loan without producing tax returns dating back to the Bronze Age. It exposes the stagecraft, the language, and the rituals that sustain the illusion long after the substance has died. Chapter 2. The Case Studies of Collapse, 4 Citizens in the Belly of the Beast. Here the illusion becomes flesh. Through the stories of the small business owner, the land steward, the working family, and the local innovator, we witness how the extraction economy chooses its prey. These depictions are not exaggerations. They are the lived reality of millions. Each character is a mirror, reflecting what happens when opportunity becomes a luxury product and risk becomes something regular people must bear alone. This chapter grounds the satire in human consequence. Chapter 3. The Descent into Debt, Austerity, and Manufactured Helplessness. If the first 2 chapters reveal what is happening, this one explains how it is sustained. Here the mechanisms of social control are placed on the examination table. Debt as a moral weapon, austerity as a national ritual of shame, and helplessness as a cultural product engineered through bureaucratic attrition and academic gaslighting. This is the internal machinery of the extraction economy, the psychological infrastructure that maintains order while everything falls apart. Chapter 4. The Catastrophic Consequences, When Pretending Isn't Enough. This is the rupture point. Once the illusions collapse, consequences arrive in predictable waves. Institutional loss of legitimacy, economic fragility metastasizing into collapse, political unraveling, and cultural fracturing into mutually incompatible realities. This chapter offers no comfort. It is the view from the cliff's edge. The moment a nation realizes it cannot descend further without a crash. Chapter 5. The Final Reckoning and the End of the Extraction Illusion. This chapter closes the analytical arc by demonstrating that collapse is not theoretical, it is active. It shows the limits of elite denial, the point at which political theater ceases to distract, and the moment when the bill arrives with no option for minimum payment. Yet it also hints at the possibility of rebirth, if the citizenry can reclaim the agency that the extraction economy has spent decades draining. The conclusion. The threshold between ruin and renewal. Finally, the work converges on one truth. The collapse of illusions is not the collapse of the nation. It can be, if recognized in time, the beginning of reclamation. The conclusion calls the reader not to despair, but to clarity, because clarity, once obtained, is irreversible. A people who understand the machinery of their own exploitation cannot easily be lulled back to sleep. That, in fact, is the subversive hope underlying every page. The purpose of this work. This book does not aim to entertain, though the absurdity of the age provides unintentional humor at every turn. It does not aim to comfort, though there is comfort in seeing one's experience articulated without euphemism. And it does not aim merely to critique, though critique is unavoidable when the empire has begun eating its young. The purpose is illumination, to document the extraction system in its totality, to expose the national theater for what it is, to mock the architects of decline in the only language they seem to understand, to confirm to the citizen what they already feel. You are not crazy. This is crazy. To not feel crazy is to actually be crazy. So take heart. You are neither alone nor insane. Only those who write the DSM-5 are. Translated in same common language, those who wrote the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition. Above all, it is a call to remember that a nation is not its elites, not its bureaucracies, not its institutions, but its people. And its people are waking. This preface is your warning. The chapters are your evidence. The conclusion is your reminder that the threshold has been crossed, and what comes next depends not on the system that failed, but on the citizens who refuse to fall with it. Introduction. A satirical opening vignette in which the nation receives a routine checkup and the doctor recommends amputation of hope. The trouble began, as these things often do, in a beige government office with fluorescent lighting calibrated to extinguish both circadian rhythm and the will to live. The room contained a metal desk, a plastic plant, and a framed motivational poster of a bald eagle soaring majestically above the slogan, "Excellence is a choice," which is exactly the sort of message one places in a room where excellence has been carefully hunted to extinction. At the center of this uninspiring habitat sat the American economy, slumped in a plastic chair, waiting its turn for a routine checkup. It wore a hospital gown 2 sizes too small, patterned with tiny dollar signs fading into insolvency. Its posture was poor, its breathing shallow, and its pulse irregular, though when asked by the nurse whether it was experiencing any pain, it insisted cheerfully, only the normal amount. The nurse, who had seen this patient many times before, sighed and scribbled something on a clipboard that translated roughly to, "This thing is held together by duct tape and denial." Moments later, the doctor entered, an elderly man with half-moon spectacles and the weary expression of someone who has spent 30 years diagnosing the same preventable diseases in systems that refuse to change their diet of corruption and convenience. He glanced at the chart, frowned, and then looked up at his patient with the forced optimism of a man who has already called the undertaker. "Well," he began, flipping pages, "your vital signs are creative." The economy brightened. "Creative? So things are good?" "That depends," the doctor said, "on whether your goal is to remain alive or merely give the appearance of life during quarterly earnings calls." This distinction was lost on the economy, which had never been particularly philosophical. "Your arteries," the doctor continued, tapping his stethoscope against the hollow chest, "are nearly clogged with debt sludge. Your bones, once quite robust, are now brittle from decades of offshoring calcium. Your muscles appear to have atrophied from lack of productive work, though your jaw seems unusually strong. Are you clenching often? Only when the citizens speak, the economy said proudly. They complain so loudly about their wages and their loans and their small businesses. You'd think they expected relief. The doctor nodded with the gentle pity one reserves for delirious patients. I see. And how is your memory? Excellent, the economy replied. I can remember every tax loophole dating back to 1974. But I can't recall a single policy benefiting Main Street. Strange, isn't it? Not at all, the doctor said. Selective memory is common in late-stage extraction disorders. He proceeded with the exam, listening to the economy's heartbeat, which thumped erratically, skipping every time the word manufacturing was mentioned, and palpitating wildly whenever private equity drifted into the air. He checked reflexes, noting that the economy kicked violently only when asked to support domestic workers, but remained perfectly still when multinational firms tapped its knees with golden hammers. The doctor murmured at last, stepping back. I see the issue. Oh, good, the economy said with relief. Is it treatable? That depends, the doctor said gravely. Are you willing to stop starving your middle class? The economy blinked. Stop starving it? But it volunteered for the diet. Besides, the consultants told me austerity is slimming. And how long, the doctor asked, have you been experiencing cognitive dissonance? Since the 70s, the economy beamed. The doctor closed the chart and sighed. Your condition is textbook. You are suffering from a chronic, progressive, self-inflicted disorder known as terminal extraction syndrome. The symptoms include hallucinations of prosperity, dependency on parasitic capital flows, compulsive outsourcing, pathological denial of inequality, weakened civic immune systems, and an inability to support your own limbs. The economy gasped. That sounds fatal. It is, the doctor agreed. But only if you refuse treatment. And the treatment? The doctor leaned forward. A complete metabolic overhaul, rebuilding local economies, restoring productive sectors, empowering citizens with access to capital, reducing dependency on predatory finance, strengthening institutional ligaments, and reintroducing a steady diet of national responsibility. The economy recoiled. I can't do any of that. Sounds like work. I suspected as much, the doctor said. So, what now? The doctor tore the top sheet from the clipboard and handed it over. This, he said, is your prognosis. The economy unfolded the paper and stared. It was blank. What does this mean? The economy whispered. It means, the doctor said quietly, that what happens next is no longer in your hands. Just then the door opened and a crowd of citizens entered, tired, wary, resolute. They carried their own clipboards, their own charts, their own diagnoses. They did not wait to be invited. They did not wait to be addressed. They simply walked in, took their places, and stared down the system that had mistaken their endurance for consent. The economy shifted nervously in its chair. What do they want? It asked. The doctor smiled softly. Reality, he said. Accountability. And a future that doesn't require selling their souls on layaway. The citizens stepped closer. The economy swallowed. The lights flickered. And thus begins the story contained in these pages, a story of a nation caught between collapse and awakening, between illusion and consequence, between extraction and regeneration, and a people finally tired of being told the smoke was incense. Part 1. The Grand National Illusion. Capitalism without capital. It takes a very special kind of civilization, one drunk on its own mythologies, lulled into somnambulant compliance by jargon-slinging elites, and soothed by bureaucrats who speak like malfunctioning GPS units, to imagine it still has capitalism, while its citizens cannot access capital. Only a society deep into its own hallucinations, where the PowerPoint class and the permanent consultantariat whisper sweet abstractions into congressional ears like overpaid sirens, could keep a straight face while insisting that the American economy is resilient as the average citizen tries to qualify for a deck repair loan the size of a minor felony. This is a national farce, a country that still thinks it's running Adam Smith's shop while the register is owned by BlackRock, the keys are managed by J.P. Morgan, the aisles are subcontracted to McKinsey, and the customers are given the glorious freedom to choose between buying nothing or buying nothing with interest. You can almost hear the founders groaning in their graves, though given the noise above them, they might assume the nation is simply holding another bipartisan seance to summon the ghost of Milton Friedman so they can misquote him again. The modern American economy is not capitalism. It is the theatrical cosplay of capitalism performed by people who have never had to risk a dime of their own money. This is the extraction economy dressed up in capitalism's tattered costume. The same way a raccoon digging through your trash imagines itself a scholar because it once saw a textbook on recycling. Access to capital defines capitalism. Deny it to the public, and what remains is not a free market. It is a controlled harvest, meticulously optimized for the benefit of the spreadsheet aristocrats, the bureaucratic clerics, and the credentialed priesthood of higher education, all of whom live in curated ecosystems where reality never intrudes without an appointment. Meanwhile, the citizen on Main Street, absurdly still referred to as the backbone of the economy by politicians who have never met one, sits in the waiting room of the National Economic Hospital, holding a number that will never be called. In this land of holy balance sheets and sacred quarterly reports, the average American discovers that the real motto of the nation is not ad pluribus unum. It is terms and conditions apply. The absurdity of capitalism. Without capital. Imagine, if you will, a starving man standing outside a buffet while the maitre d' insists he is participating fully in the dining experience. That is America's relationship to capital. The buffet exists, but the citizen is granted access only to the aroma wafting from the kitchen vents. The elites explain this arrangement with the same tone one uses when reassuring a toddler that their toy vacuum cleaner is helping clean the house. They insist that capital is more accessible than ever, as long as you already have capital, immaculate credit, a debt-to-income ratio lower than a monastery's expenses, and a business plan written in language approved by the Federal Reserve's own style guide. This is the paradox. Capitalism exists, but the capital has been sequestered behind gated liquidity pools guarded by institutional dragons who call themselves market makers. The average American is free to fill out as many forms as desired, forms that travel through the bureaucratic digestive tract until they finally emerge as a rejection letter stating, with breathtaking confidence, that the applicant simply does not demonstrate the financial health required to obtain the financial resources to become financially healthy. It is a system so elegantly circular that it would impress any totalitarian regime with a taste for irony. Main Street, the colony of the new economic empire. Main Street, formerly known as the beating heart of the Republic, has become a kind of anthropological preserve maintained for nostalgia and political photo ops. It is a quaint zone where capital is unavailable, risk is discouraged, innovation is punished. Ownership is an exotic relic spoken of in hushed tones. Meanwhile, the professional class delivers TED Talks about entrepreneurship while never leaving the safe comfort of their employer-sponsored perks and catered salad bars. These are the evangelists of empowerment, men and women who celebrate risk-taking so long as it involves someone else's mortgage. Academia joins in the chorus, publishing a new paper every month explaining that success is a function of grit resilience markers or behavioral adaptive cognition, while ignoring the only variable that actually matters, having enough capital to survive the first 12 months. But the Academy cannot acknowledge this truth, because doing so would require admitting its own irrelevance. And bureaucracy cannot acknowledge it, because bureaucracy survives by requiring the citizen to prove again and again that they are undeserving of what the bureaucracy exists to distribute. Thus, the extraction economy thrives. It thrives because it has mastered the art of convincing the public that deprivation is empowerment, debt is opportunity, and precarity is freedom. The elites, architects of a system, they never have to live in. To understand the elites, one must first remember that their lived experience is to the average citizen what a space station is to a rowboat. Their world is hermetically sealed, climate-controlled, and carefully insulated against anything resembling economic weather. These are people who talk about inflation while sipping a $19 green juice flown in from a farm that exists solely to provide aesthetic authenticity to urban elites who wish to perform the appearance of rustic simplicity while wearing linen fashion designed in Milan. They speak of tightening belts while their private chefs prepare artisanal reductions. They speak of market headwinds from their 12,000 square-foot estates, where the only wind they experience comes from imported bamboo ceiling fans. They speak of resilience while never facing a single consequence for their mistakes. You cannot expect these people to understand the average American's plight. They do not live in America. They live above it, floating in a parallel society where the laws of economic gravity simply do not apply. Their children attend schools where the tuition equals a working family's annual income. Their mortgages are negotiated by private bankers who greet them with beverages. Their loans are approved before the ink dries because, in the extraction economy, money flows to those who do not need it and away from those who do. The entire system is a hydraulic pump built to move resources upward, leaving Main Street drier than a bureaucrat's sense of humor. Bureaucrats, the high priests of institutional stagnation. If the elites are the architects of the extraction economy, the bureaucrats are its janitors except with the salary, benefits, and self-importance of medieval clergy. They preside over the machinery of decline with a reverence normally reserved for sacred relics. The bureaucratic mind is a marvel of evolutionary stasis. It can transform a simple request for a business loan into a 36-page labyrinth of demands for documentation that hasn't existed since the Eisenhower administration. It can convert an entrepreneur's hope into a case number. It can explain with a straight face that a delay of 6 months is standard processing time. Bureaucrats treat the citizen not as a stakeholder, but as an inconvenience. Their job is not to facilitate opportunity. It is to defend the system against change, improvement, or anything resembling progress. In the bureaucratic worldview, every problem is a form, every solution is a new office, and every failure is an opportunity to request additional funding. This tribe of paper-bound sentinels does not understand capitalism because they do not participate in it. Their salaries arrive with the consistency of a solar cycle, immune to the failures their decisions produce. And so the American citizen learns painfully and repeatedly that capitalism without access to capital is not an economic system. It is a performance, a ritual, a ceremonial invocation of prosperity performed by people who confuse GDP graphs with reality. Academics, philosophers of a world they cannot survive in. And then there are the academics, the robed visionaries who write treatises on opportunity while living lives that contain none of the risk, uncertainty, or economic brutality experienced by those they study. These are the theorists who praise the creative destruction of the market, while ensuring their tenure contracts are immune to both creativity and destruction. They speculate about market dynamics in language that requires 2 graduate degrees and an emotional support animal to interpret. Their textbooks explain capitalism as though it still exists. Their lectures insist that upward mobility is real. Their models pretend that debt is a tool of opportunity rather than an anchor. They never notice that the only people still ascending the social ladder are those who began at the top or those whose parents installed an elevator before they were born. In the academic imagination, the entrepreneur is a heroic figure until he applies for a loan. Then he becomes a case study in risk asymmetry mismanagement or demographically predictable failure trajectories. If these people ever had to survive in the real economy, they would perish in days, victims of their own theories, swallowed whole by the billing cycles they forgot to model. Part 2. The Autopsy of the American Middle Class. 4 citizens in the belly of the extraction economy. It is fashionable in Washington and the think tank Archipelago to refer to Main Street as the backbone of the economy. This phrase is repeated with the confidence of a man quoting scripture he has never read, and with the sincerity of a lobbyist promising to follow up next week. In truth, Main Street is not the backbone. It is the carcass. And the extraction economy is the pack of hyenas, politely dressed in suits, recycling talking points while performing the slow national cannibalism. To understand the collapse of capitalism in a nation without access to capital, one need only follow 4 citizens, each an archetype, each a casualty of an economic order, run by people whose understanding of risk resembles their understanding of manual labor, theoretical, abstract, and best avoided. These 4 are not hypothetical. They are real enough to make the elites uncomfortable and symbolic enough to indict the entire system. Let us meet them as they stand in line at America's great altar of economic aspiration. The credit window. 1. The small business owner who mistook persistence for a business plan. Meet Harold. Harold owns a hardware store on a street where the American dream used to rent space before it moved offshore. His store has existed for 3 generations, which in today's America is the financial equivalent of surviving multiple volcanic eruptions with a wet towel and good intentions. Harold needs a loan to renegotiate vendor contracts, replace failing refrigeration units, and simply stay competitive in a market dominated by mega corporations that treat local economies the way timber barons once treated forests, as temporary inconveniences between harvests. He approaches the bank, his bank, mind you, the one that has held his family's deposits since Eisenhower still believed in sanity, and asks for a modest working capital loan. The banker, a man whose handshake feels like a damp napkin and whose eyes reflect not intelligence but compliance, greets him with the warmth of an automated phone menu. "Of course, Harold, we value long-standing customers," he says, while pulling out a checklist thick enough to qualify as a novella. "We just need to verify a few things." By a few things, he means 3 years of profit statements, 6 years at the tax returns, inventory audits, a risk assessment, a business plan explaining the business plan. Proof Harold is not a criminal mastermind disguised as a humble proprietor. Harold provides all of it. He even includes a handwritten note explaining the market changes. Because Harold, unlike his banker, lives in the real world where market volatility means a supplier raised prices by 19% because of global headwinds, which is corporate euphemism for we can. The bank reviews his application for 6 weeks, during which it loses the documents twice, forgets to contact the credit underwriter once, and claims his signature does not match historical file patterns, which is banker code for the system is broken, but we blame you anyway. Finally, the answer arrives. We regret to inform you. Regret. A fascinating word, coming from people who feel nothing. Harold is denied. The reason? Insufficient liquidity. In other words, if he had the money, he wouldn't need the money, and would therefore qualify to borrow the money he no longer needs. This is capitalism's funhouse mirror. A system where access to capital is reserved only for those who live permanently insulated from its necessity. Harold goes home. The elites go to lunch. The economy marches on paper. 2. The landowner who learned that ownership without leverage is just a fancy kind of poverty. Next, meet Regina. Regina owns 50 acres of pine that her family has managed responsibly for decades. An oasis of green surrounded by the ecological devastation that America calls commercial forestry, a phrase that has done more violence to land than the 19th century railroad barons. Regina wants to expand her property operations, integrate agroforestry corridors, and develop sustainable revenue streams that would stabilize her shrinking small-town economy. She does not want to sell, subdivide, or be devoured by hedge fund timber speculators who treat forests the way slot machines treat pension checks. She meets with a loan officer to secure a modest capital line based on the appraised value of her land. Her appraiser praises the ecological health of her acreage. Her banker praises the same, the way one praises a puppy before selling it. Then the verdict arrives. Your land is considered non-liquid collateral. This is bureaucratic poetry. A landowner in the United States of America is informed her land has no liquidity from the very institutions that spent 20 years marketing land ownership as the cornerstone of American prosperity. The banker explains that timberland is too volatile unless it's owned by a timber REIT or private equity fund. Those entities naturally qualify instantly for credit lines measured in the tens of millions. Regina, however, does not. Because she is one woman trying to build a future for her family and community, an activity considered high risk by the modern banking priesthood, which only approves projects whose primary contribution to society is share buybacks. Regina hangs onto her land, but without capital leverage, she becomes rich in assets and poor in cash flow, a paradox now common across rural America. This is how a nation destroys wealth without destroying property. It denies citizens the ability to use their assets, while encouraging conglomerates to strip land bare like digital locusts. In America's extraction economy, ownership is permitted. Prosperity is not. 3. The working family who discovered that debt is the nation's true citizenship test. Now meet Josh and Kimberly. They are exactly what the managerial class means when it says the average American household, a phrase that economists deploy with clinical detachment, the way a pathologist might describe tissue samples in a petri dish. Josh works 2 jobs. Kimberly works one and runs a side business, selling handmade crafts online, competing against sweatshop-priced imports masquerading as artisan goods in e-commerce marketplaces that treat authenticity as a moral inconvenience. Their monthly budget resembles a hostage negotiation. Every bill is a demand. Every due date is a threat. Every late fee is a punishment for not being rich enough to avoid needing the service in the first place. One day they try for a home equity loan to consolidate debt and escape the mounting interest that compounds faster than their income can grow. Their credit score: good. Payment history: perfect. Work ethic: impeccable. Collateral: excellent. Denied. Note on account. Destroy all four, then offer them another high-interest credit card. The reason? Their debt-to-income ratio is too high, which is exactly why they needed the loan. This is the economic equivalent of telling a drowning man that he cannot have a life raft because his clothes are too wet. What the extraction economy truly wants from working families is simple: pay your debts. Don't expect upward mobility. Consume enough to keep the metrics happy. Complain quietly. Never demand structural reform. Josh and Kimberly will never default. They are too honest, too responsible, too American in the older sense of the word, believing that effort should matter. This belief will be extracted from them eventually, the way value is extracted from everything in this economy. 4. The Main Street entrepreneur who learned that innovation is reserved for the already powerful. Finally, meet Lainey. Lainey is the type of entrepreneur politicians love to praise during election season. Smart, resilient, grounded, and dangerous because she thinks for herself. She designs a new local distribution platform that would reduce costs for small-town businesses while improving supply chain resilience, a solution that, in a rational nation, would attract angel investors, community banks, or at the very least, a federal small business accelerator. Instead, she encounters regional banks uninterested in anything smaller than $5 million credit facilities, federal programs that require overhead beyond what she earns in a year, corporate investors who only back companies designed for eventual acquisition, local officials who ask whether her platform can go viral on TikTok. She is rejected repeatedly, not because her idea lacks merit, but because it does not fit the extraction economy's template. The extraction economy does not reward innovation that strengthens communities. It rewards innovation that extracts value from them. Lainey finally receives an email from a venture firm that says, with breathtaking condescension, "We only invest in scalable solutions that demonstrate high growth potential in markets conducive to rapid expansion. Your idea seems too anchored in place." Too anchored in place. This might as well be the epitaph of the American middle class. Lainey isn't trying to build a unicorn. She's trying to build a stable regional economy. The extraction economy hates stability. Stability reduces dependence. Dependence increases extraction. And so Lainey remains unfunded. Not because her idea is bad, but because it is good. Too good. Too local. Too beneficial to people who don't sit on the boards of multinational conglomerates. Together, they form the anatomy of a nation in decline. Harold, Regina, Josh, and Kimberly, and Lainey are not just 4 people. They are the 4 key components of a functioning civilization: the small business, the landowner, the working family, the local innovator. The extraction economy requires all 4 to fail. Their failure is not a bug of the system. It is the system. This is how you end capitalism without saying so. You starve the citizen of capital, drown them in debt, and congratulate yourself on market efficiency. You call it a resilient economy. You call them stakeholders. You call the collapse a transition. But the truth is simpler. It is anything but. A nation without access to capital is not capitalist. It is captive. And Main Street is the prisoner everyone pretends is free. Part 3. The Descent of Main Street, Debt, Austerity, Dispossession, and the Fine Art of Manufacturing Helplessness. Let us descend now, past the marble columns of Washington's temples of pretense, past the economic press releases written in the dialect of delusion, down beneath the PowerPoint ether where the self-anointed geniuses of the Republic congratulate one another for their brilliance while the nation quietly decomposes beneath them. We are no longer in the polite territory of white papers and policy briefs. We are descending into the cavern where the extraction economy grinds the middle class into a tidy product ready for institutional packaging, something between a fine powder and a paste. Here, amidst the gears and belts and elegant cruelty, we find the three primary devices through which Main Street is unmade: debt, austerity, and helplessness. These instruments form a trinity so perfect, so exquisitely engineered that even the most sadistic medieval inquisitor would look upon them with professional admiration. This is where the American dream is processed, where citizenship becomes servitude, where hope goes to be garnished, repossessed, and resold at auction as inspirational content. Let us begin with the most elegant weapon of all, debt. Debt, the national operating system of the Extraction Republic. Debt is the closest thing modern America has to a state religion. It is omnipresent, deeply moralized, and enforced with the zeal of a priesthood, convinced it is doing the Lord's work. It enters your life not with threat or menace, but with a smile, a brochure, and an interest rate that looks harmless until it compounds into a second mortgage on your sanity. It masquerades as opportunity. It arrives disguised as empowerment. It presents itself as the modern equivalent of a rite of passage. The student loan is framed as the golden key to a prosperous future, though it often functions more like a ball and chain forged from compounding interest and broken promises. The credit card is described as a tool for building responsible financial habits, a charming euphemism for teaching teenagers how to enter a lifelong relationship with revolving debts. Auto loans are pitched as the gateway to employment, as though a $45,000 car with 6 years of payments is a patriotic duty. And the mortgage, the holiest of all debts, is hailed as the foundation of generational wealth, but only if you live long enough to outpace the interest or avoid the next financial crisis engineered by people who never learn anything except how to be rescued. Each of these debts binds the citizen not to a future, but to an algorithm. The citizen becomes a walking data set, a monetizable organism whose primary purpose is to produce revenue streams for institutions that consider human beings credit profiles with inconvenient biological maintenance requirements. The magic of debt is that it convinces its victims they are partners. Partners in what? Partners in paying down principal for 36 years. Partners in subsidizing corporate liquidity. Partners in stabilizing an economy that no longer includes them in its plans. And when the citizen falters, when medical bills arrive, when wages stagnate, when interest rates jump, the extraction clergy swoops in to deliver its favorite sermon. Personal responsibility, because in this brilliant arrangement, if the system fails you, it's your fault. If the banks fail you, it's your fault. If your wages don't keep pace with inflation, it's your fault. If you drown, they hand you a pamphlet titled How to Become a Better Swimmer While Tied to an Anvil. Debt is not a tool in modern America. Debt is the water supply. Debt is the nervous system. Debt is the country. Austerity, the national ritual of punishing the wrong people. If debt is the leash, austerity is the public ceremony where the citizen is paraded around the town square and blamed for the dogma the elites invented. Austerity is one of the great wonders of institutional psychology. It is consistently deployed only against the groups that had nothing to do with the problem. When the economy crashes because Wall Street created derivative arrangements so convoluted that NASA engineers would find them esoteric, the recommended solution is the closure of public libraries in Nebraska. When multinationals evade taxes so aggressively that their accountants deserve special operations medals, the official remedy is reducing school lunch programs. When federal agencies deliver budgetary disasters, the moral corrective is telling average Americans to tighten belts while the agencies authorize new office renovations. No matter how many times the elites crash the car, the working class is instructed to fix the dents. Inside the managerial cosmopolis, the corporate NGOs, the policy salons, the civic leadership councils, austerity is spoken of with the reverence of a sacrament. Economists with expensive eyewear and no visible shame appear on cable news to explain why citizens must downshift consumption expectations, a phrase that translates roughly to be happy with less so we can continue feasting on more. These austerity sermons drip with condescension. You can almost hear the subtext. You must live within your means. We, on the other hand, must live above yours. The psychological genius of austerity is that it recasts elite negligence as citizen misbehavior. The budget deficit wasn't caused by trillion-dollar wars, irresponsible banking, or giveaways to corporations who specialize in creatively redefining the meaning of taxable revenue. No, the deficit was caused by you, the citizen, daring to attempt medical treatment and indoor heating during the same fiscal quarter. Austerity works because it disguises systemic malice as household common sense. It weaponizes the virtue of frugality against the very people who've practiced it longest. Manufactured helplessness, the final stage of national pacification. By the time a citizen is fully indebted, thoroughly austerity, and soaked psychologically in the rhetoric of blame, they have reached the final stage of the extraction economy's design, helplessness. Helplessness is not an accident or a tragic byproduct. It is the intentional engineered condition required to maintain the system indefinitely. If the public ever stopped feeling hopeless, they might start feeling opinionated. Worse, they might start feeling empowered. This cannot be allowed. Helplessness begins with the slow erosion of agency. Every time the citizen attempts to navigate the bureaucracy, whether they apply for a permit, seek assistance, attempt to open a business, ask for clarity, or merely try to get a human being on the phone, they are met with a maze of procedural obstacles so labyrinthine that even Greek myth would consider them excessive. Requests for help are transformed into quests. Simple tasks balloon into year-long odysseys involving documents nobody has seen since the Hoover administration. Over time, citizens internalize the message. This system is not here to help you. It is here to metabolize your hope. What it actually does is the anesthetizing of both hope and mobility. Academia reinforces this beautifully. Professors, who themselves would starve to death within a week of entering a real economy, publish solemn research papers solemnly explaining that your struggles are not the result of institutional design, but of natural economic laws. Globalization, they proclaim, is inevitable. Supply chain fragility is unavoidable. Domestic manufacturing is uncompetitive. Community resilience is nostalgic fantasy. Local ownership is outdated. And the shrinking middle class is simply an adjustment to global realities. Translated, submit. Nothing can be done. Now please turn to page 417 of your textbook and read the chapter on adaptive coping behaviors during structural collapse. Meanwhile, daily life becomes financialized to the point of absurdity. Groceries turn into speculative assets influenced by droughts in foreign countries you can't locate on a map. Housing behaves like a casino chip. Education becomes a mortgage disguised as enlightenment. Healthcare becomes a hedge fund disguised as mercy. Every decision becomes the calculus of volatility, risk, and collateralized vulnerability. In such an environment, the citizen becomes not a person, but a risk-bearing unit navigating a hurricane with coupons. When every aspect of life requires vigilance, planning, and financial gymnastics, there is no cognitive surplus left for political engagement. Helplessness thus becomes self-reinforcing, and exhaustion, once it sets in, becomes permanent. The quiet conversion from citizen to tenant. As debt tightens, austerity scolds, and helplessness settles into the bones, a quiet transformation occurs. The citizen becomes something else entirely, a tenant, economically, politically, and psychologically. They may still possess property, but they no longer possess leverage. They may still hold deeds, but they no longer hold bargaining power. They may still own homes, but they cannot extract capital from them. They may still exist in a political system, but they no longer participate meaningfully in shaping it. Ownership becomes ceremonial. Participation becomes symbolic. Citizenship becomes a subscription service you can cancel, but only involuntarily. This is how a nation dispossesses its people without ever seizing a single asset by force. It simply ensures that the assets they own are financially useless, structurally unsupported, and politically irrelevant. In such a system, the average American no longer dreams of upward mobility. They dream of stability, which itself now feels like a luxury good, a nation of the weary and the weary of the nation. What remains after all the extraction is not revolt, rebellion, or even indignation. What remains is exhaustion, deep, pervasive exhaustion. An exhaustion so complete that even rage requires too much effort. Exhausted citizens go to work. Exhausted citizens pay their debts. Exhausted citizens comply with policies written by people who have never met a consequence. Exhausted citizens are grateful to survive another month. Exhausted citizens do not demand justice, they demand fewer emails. The extraction economy's final achievement is not poverty or inequality. Those are simply byproducts. The final achievement is turning a free people into a people too tired to remember what freedom felt like. This is how a nation declines without drama. This is how a people lose rights without protest. This is how an empire collapses without fanfare. Not with fire, not with fury, but with fatigue. Part 4. The catastrophic consequences of a nation that pretends while it declines, the reckoning, the rupture, and the end of the extraction illusion. There comes a moment in every collapsing empire when the performance becomes impossible to maintain. The lies lose their shine, the slogans lose their authority, the graphs flatten into absurdity. The talking heads begin repeating phrases that even they no longer believe, their confidence faltering in tiny, flickering signals like dying fluorescent lights in an abandoned mall. For America's extraction economy, that moment is no longer looming on the horizon. It is here. It is now. It is everywhere and obvious, except to the only people paid handsomely to not notice. This final section is not a prediction. It is an autopsy. It is the point where satire meets realism because the truth has become so grotesque that humor serves merely as a disinfectant. The consequences of an economy that devours its own people in the name of efficiency are not hypothetical. They are structural, measurable, historical, and inescapable. Let us now examine with precision and laughter that tastes faintly of blood the inevitable fallout. The implosion of legitimacy. When institutions run out of excuses, institutions can survive incompetence. They can survive mismanagement. They can survive foolishness. They can even survive scandal. What they cannot survive is ridicule backed by lived experience. Once the public sees the man behind the curtain, dressed in an $1,800 suit 3 sizes too big, mumbling about market resilience while the roof collapses, the game is over. The old stories lose their magic. The old language collapses into parody. In an extraction economy, the first institution to lose legitimacy is the banking system. The public realizes that the banks are not intermediaries but predatory zoos where citizens are the captive exhibit. Every denial becomes a joke. Every fee becomes a punchline. Every time a bank CEO explains, "We take risk very seriously," citizens wonder if he means the risks he imposes on them or the risks he takes with their deposits. The second institution to fall is bureaucracy. The public eventually understands that bureaucracy is not a neutral administrative structure, but a kind of parasitic life form that thrives on human confusion and grows stronger from every hour of lost time. Once the citizen sees the bureaucratic emperor naked, pale, soft, and brandishing a stapler, like a ceremonial scepter, the reverence evaporates. The third institution to collapse is academia. When the public realizes that the credentialed class has been writing theoretical fan fiction for 30 years while the country burned, the PhD loses its aura. The footnotes lose their authority. The papers lose their mystique. The public recognizes that the academic priesthood produced nothing but word clouds, inflated tuition, and an elegant vocabulary for explaining why nothing could ever change. But the final collapse, the fatal blow, comes when the public recognizes the truth about their leaders. They are not wise. They are not strategic. They are not even competent. They are merely confident. And confidence, history teaches us, is indistinguishable from delusion when detached from reality. At this point, legitimacy implodes. Not explosively, but like a souffle collapsing under its own weight, quietly, inevitably, and with a vaguely comedic sadness. 2. The economic cascade. When the pyramid finally remembers, it is not a square. The extraction economy is a pyramid, but not the majestic kind that impresses archaeologists. No, this pyramid is the kind you find behind a strip mall next to a payday loan establishment, cheap, gaudy, highly unstable, and likely to collapse under the slightest pressure, crushing everyone except the architects who have already fled to their vacation compounds. When the economy is built on consumption without wages, credit without collateral, growth without prosperity, and corporate profits without national benefit, collapse does not require a dramatic trigger. It requires only that reality accumulate long enough to be noticed. The cascade begins with consumer exhaustion. A population living paycheck to paycheck does not purchase discretionary goods. They do not buy new appliances. They do not renovate homes. They do not participate in confidence-building economic rituals. Instead, they patch, mend, repair, stretch, delay, defer, and hope their car engine survives another 6 months. When consumption slows, corporate revenues flatten. When revenues flatten, layoffs begin. Layoffs trigger the next phase, community contraction. When jobs disappear, small towns empty out like pockets in a laundromat. Main streets go dark, one storefront at a time. The local diner closes. The hardware shop locks its doors. The mom-and-pop pharmacy is swallowed by a chain that operates with the grace of a sledgehammer. Local tax revenue collapses, and with it the municipal services that preserve social cohesion. The third phase is institutional retreat. Hospitals close. Schools consolidate. Universities slash departments and inflate administrative offices in a last-ditch survival maneuver that resembles a snake eating its own tail. Fire departments downsize. Police departments triage. County governments become skeletal frameworks staffed by overworked clerks who now handle the responsibilities of entire departments. Growing instability triggers a fourth phase, capital flight disguised as strategic repositioning. Corporations quietly withdraw. Private equity begins liquidating anything that isn't bolted to the floor. The language of exit becomes abstract. Market realignment, temporary restructuring, regional optimization. These phrases mean the same thing. Good luck, peasants. The final economic consequence is the emergence of a new feudal map. Concentrated zones of wealth surrounded by vast territories of abandonment, each governed not by elected institutions, but by market forces indifferent to the fate of their subjects. This is the moment when the extraction economy stops pretending it is capitalism and starts admitting it is serfdom with better branding. 3. The political unraveling. When citizens realize they are not participants, but revenue streams. A nation can survive a great deal. It can survive war. It can survive corruption. It can survive foolishness. What it cannot survive is the moment its citizens realize their political participation is ceremonial. Once citizens recognize that voting is a ritual designed to sanctify decisions made elsewhere, political legitimacy dissolves. They no longer believe in parties, candidates, or the script of democratic theater that once animated civic life. The extraction economy relies on political distraction, but distraction only works when people still trust the distractor. As Main Street collapses, the political system finds itself presiding over a population no longer moved by familiar incantations. They no longer care about the slogans. They no longer care about the televised debates where highly compensated participants perform adversarial cosplay while agreeing on every structural assumption. They no longer believe policy proposals are anything more than recycled talking points crafted by consultants who test messages the same way one tests shampoo scents. When the citizenry realizes the political establishment is not governing but refereeing the competition between corporate factions, the unraveling accelerates. Citizens lose faith in policy. They lose faith in expertise. They lose faith in the incentives of the system. They lose faith in the idea that anything happening in Washington is connected to their lived reality. And when citizens lose faith, they stop cooperating. This is the moment when governments face the most dangerous force in political history, a population that has ceased to believe. A people who do not believe cannot be mobilized. A people who do not believe cannot be placated. A people who do not believe cannot be manipulated. A people who do not believe cannot be governed. And so politics begins to convulse, chaotically, unpredictably, and with a comedic desperation reminiscent of a circus act in which every performer is both incompetent and convinced of their own brilliance. 4. The cultural fracture, when shared reality breaks into kingdoms of delusion. Cultural unity requires shared meaning. But shared meaning requires shared experience, and shared experience requires shared prosperity, at least at the level where people still believe the game is real. In an extraction economy, prosperity is not shared. Only the suffering is. As life becomes precarious, the nation's cultural center collapses into a patchwork of separate realities. Everyone chooses a tribe. Each tribe chooses a narrative, and every narrative becomes a fortress. One group believes the system collapsed because of globalization. Another believes it collapsed because of immigration. Another blames elites. Another blames the working class. Another blames the other half of the working class. And still another insists everything is fine because their stock portfolio, propped up by monetary policy and wishful thinking, still shows green numbers. This fragmentation accelerates when institutions that once mediated reality, news organizations, schools, community organizations, lose credibility. People stop sharing facts. They stop sharing experiences. They stop sharing a common vocabulary. They stop sharing a national story. When a nation loses its cultural narrative, it does not drift apart. It shatters. Each shard reflects a different version of events. Each shard claims to be the truth. Each shard becomes increasingly incompatible with the others. The nation becomes a mosaic of mutually exclusive fictions, each defended with the fervor of a religion and the precision of a grudge. But the final reckoning. The bill comes due. At last, after all the denial, after all the distraction, after all the managerial optimism and policy hypnotism, the reckoning arrives. It arrives quietly at first. Silent layoffs, declining life expectancy, fragile supply lines, rising crime, shrinking birth rates, and subtle signals of a civilization that has stopped believing in its own future. Then the reckoning becomes loud. Infrastructure buckles. Housing becomes unaffordable to the workers who built it. Healthcare becomes inaccessible to the people who need it. Trust decays. Civic life collapses. Public order frays. The nation enters a phase of consequences that no one in Washington, or on Wall Street, or in Silicon Valley ever truly modeled, because modeling requires acknowledging the obvious. A system that extracts everything eventually finds there is nothing left to extract. When that moment arrives, the illusions evaporate. The empire stops pretending. The public stops believing. The center stops holding. And the truth becomes impossible to ignore. A nation that denies its citizens access to capital is not a capitalist republic. It is a managed decline wrapped in patriotic language. It is an extraction machine wearing a flag as a smock. It is a system designed to fail gracefully while pretending to succeed. The bill has come due. And for the first time in decades, the collectors are knocking on the doors of those who engineered the collapse. Because in the end, the elites discover what they always forget. A collapsing nation does not stop at the bottom. It falls on those at the top. Conclusion. When the lights come on, a nation standing in the rubble of its own pretenses. At the end of this long descent, through the illusions, the machinery, the casualties, and the consequences, we stand now before the full silhouette of the extraction economy in all its inglorious anatomy. What we have uncovered is not a misunderstanding, not a temporary misalignment, not an unfortunate accident of policy drift, but a full-blown, architected system designed to operate exactly as it does a sleek national apparatus that extracts value upward, distributes risk downward, and convinces everyone in the middle that the outcome is somehow inevitable, natural, or divinely ordained. What makes this system particularly effective is not its brute strength, but its theatrical finesse. It performs capitalism without providing capital, performs democracy without distributing power, performs opportunity while ensuring the ladders are sawed in half, and performs reform while producing nothing but press releases written in the dialect of technocratic wizardry. The extraction economy is less an economic model than a national magic trick, one executed so smoothly that citizens applaud even as their wallets disappear. Yet illusions cannot survive indefinitely. Eventually the lights come on. Eventually the citizens look around. And what they find is sobering. They discover that the so-called free market is free only for those who do not need it. That the financial system rewards those who create instability and punishes those who endure it. That bureaucracy is not an administrative necessity, but a defensive moat, protecting institutions from accountability. That academia has become the theological wing of the managerial class, generating doctrines to justify the unjustifiable. And that political leadership has become a shell game played by men and women more committed to preserving the performance than confronting the problems. Most critically, they discover that Main Street, the supposed backbone of the economy, was not the backbone but the banquet. The system did not neglect Main Street accidentally. It harvested it intentionally. It turned small businesses into collateral, landowners into liquidity traps, working families into revenue streams, and local innovators into inconvenient footnotes. And now the consequences have arrived, not with melodrama, but with the dull, grinding certainty of a machine completing its final cycle. The nation finds itself exhausted, disillusioned, and fraying at the seams. The center struggles to hold because nothing real anchors it. The stories that once kept the Republic coherent, upward mobility, civic virtue, institutional legitimacy, national solidarity, have been hollowed out, polished, and sold as collector's items on the tables of political nostalgists. But here lies the truth hidden beneath the wreckage. The collapse of an illusion is not the same as the collapse of a nation. In fact, the end of the illusion may be the beginning of the Republic's renewal. For the first time in decades, Americans are seeing the system clearly, without the filters of political branding, academic jargon, corporate propaganda, or bureaucratic fog. They are seeing the extraction economy not as an inevitability, but as a choice. They are recognizing that the arrangement that devoured them was built by human hands, not the laws of physics. And what human hands built, human hands can dismantle, redesign, and rebuild. This moment of national clarity is not comfortable. It is not convenient. But it is essential. Because the only thing worse than discovering your house is on fire is believing for decades that the smoke is market volatility, and the flames are structural adjustments. The conclusion, then, is simple and brutal. A nation cannot endure on an economy designed to consume its citizens. A republic cannot stand when capital is accessible only to the few. A people cannot remain free when they are too exhausted to imagine freedom. And a system that extracts more than it creates must eventually face the bill. The reckoning is already underway. The illusions are already cracking. And the citizens, long deprived, long dismissed, long underestimated, are awakening to the fact that the managers of decline are not stewards of order, but architects of entropy. Whether this awakening becomes renewal or simply the prelude to deeper collapse, depends not on the elites who engineered the system, nor the bureaucrats who maintained it, nor the academics who justified it, but on the citizens who must now decide whether to rebuild from the rubble or continue living among it. In the end, the lesson is unmistakable. You cannot starve a body and expect it to run. You cannot drain the spirit and expect it to aspire. You cannot hollow out the middle and expect the whole to stand. A republic that remembers this truth may yet rise again. A republic that forgets it will not rise at all. It will eventually fall, and fall it should, in poetic judgment and one final act of self-destructive, self-imposed satire. As for a people, so too for the nation. Author's final thoughts. As if I had not said enough already, the eulogy for a nation and the benediction for the one rising. There comes a moment in the life of every nation when it must confront itself in the mirror, not the flattering mirror polished by consultants, propagandists, and credentialed whisperers, but the unyielding mirror that reflects truth without cosmetics. At the end of this long examination, having dissected the illusions, unmasked the architects of decline, and walked with the reader through the debris of a system that mistook exploitation for efficiency and decay for resilience, it is time to say aloud what has been evident for years. The nation we were taught to believe in has died. Not the people, not the land, not the soul, but the illusion, that shimmering hologram of prosperity, fairness, opportunity, and shared destiny, has taken its final breath. The extraction economy, that great machine of national cannibalism, has consumed the last scraps of its own myth. Let the record show it did not die peacefully. It died muttering slogans. It died waving charts. It died insisting everything was fine. It died the way all arrogant nations die, convinced to the end that collapse was something that only happened to others. And so, as the symbolic casket is lowered, let us speak truth. The old system deserved its burial. It was a house built on debt, a roof held up by denial, and a floor polished with the sweat of citizens told to be grateful for the privilege of being stepped on. It preached freedom while engineering dependence. It praised work while rewarding extraction. It celebrated prosperity while ensuring that prosperity always lived elsewhere. But funerals, real funerals, are not simply about what was lost. They are about what remains, what endures, what rises. And here at the edge of this national grave, another truth emerges, quieter, humbler, stronger. The real nation is not dead. It was simply smothered for a time beneath the weight of its own illusions. The real nation, its people, its communities, its land, its dignity, is not a corpse. It is a seed, and seeds do their best work underground. This resurrection is not the sanitized, sentimental kind beloved by speechwriters and pundits. It is the rough, raw, unpredictable rebirth that occurs when a people finally tire of being lied to, tired of being farmed instead of served, tired of watching a managerial elite run a country the way an absentee landlord runs a failing plantation. The real nation rises the moment its citizens recognize that the collapse of a fraudulent system is not a tragedy, but a liberation. The old America, the one of hollow rhetoric and extractive rituals, has fallen. Good riddance. It was time. But the true America, the one forged in reality, anchored in truth, animated by citizens who refuse to bow to managed decline, is stirring. And like all resurrections, it arrives with clarity, with consequence, and with the fierce, unmistakable conviction that suffering must never again be mistaken for destiny. So let this be the closing benediction. We bury not a nation, but a lie. We mourn not the people, but the system that betrayed them. And we celebrate not nostalgia, but awakening. If the old order collapses under the weight of its own excess, so be it. If the illusions shatter at last, let them. Truth deserves the space they once occupied. And to the reader, to the citizen who has endured, who has seen, who has refused to surrender to exhaustion, know this: the rebirth of a nation always begins where the deception ends. This essay closes, but the real story begins now. Not in Washington, not in corporate towers, not in academic cloisters, but in the hearts, hands, and homes of the people who were always the nation long before the stewards of decline mistook themselves for its authors. The funeral is finished. The resurrection is underway. And the truth, however sharp, has finally returned to its rightful place as the cornerstone of the republic that will rise from the ashes of the one we now lay to rest. As it is for people, so too for the nation. And a nation risen in truth cannot be deceived nor devoured so easily again.